Welcome, martial arts fans and global martial arts enthusiasts, to the 7th World Kungfu Championships. We are here to celebrate the arts and forms of traditional WUSHU, also known to many around the world as Kung Fu. The World Championships are coming to you live on location from the Sichuan International Tourism Trade Expo Center in beautiful Emeishan City in the gorgeous province of Sichuan. This is an incredible city with wonderful, generous people, and I might add the very, very best food in the world. Here at the World Championships, we have over 3,000 athletes from dozens and dozens of countries representing the true diversity of the Chinese martial arts. And today, we will celebrate the non-combative forms of WUSHU. We will have a nice cross-section of styles, including Wing Chun, Salifo Chuan, and traditional Nan Chuan. Later on this morning, we will also see the Broadsword and a wide range of other non-combative styles of Taolu, the non-combative forms of WUSHU. It's going to be a beautiful session of martial artistry here to showcase competition, yes, of course, but also expressions of athleticism, individuality, and artistry. We will have many questions if you are a new viewer, and those questions, our curiosity, will be answered by my broadcast partner, lifelong WUSHU practitioner, coach, competitor. He was a competitor at the 6th World Kung Fu Championships. He is also an IWUF accredited official judge, referee, and he will quench our curiosity about WUSHU, its culture and diversity and history. I welcome Tony Sims to the broadcast booth. My friend, welcome this morning.
Good morning, Robin. It's great to be here with you for another amazing day here at the World Kung Fu Championships in Sichuan province.
Here are some of our officials. You have played that role many, near hundreds of times now.
Sure, this is a great tradition of Chinese martial arts competitions, introducing the judges and technical officials. Here, because this competition is so incredibly large, we have multiple carpets and multiple sets of judges that will need to be introduced.
It's a fascinating arm of their martial arts journey, or your martial arts journey, to examine into being an official, being the details of judging these forms. It becomes a different part of your martial arts journey.
Sure. The judges typically have meetings before the competition for a couple of days, refresher courses. They also have meetings before the sessions begin during the day and often after the session. So there's a lot that goes into planning to ensure that we have a smooth competition and also with the highest caliber of judging.
Now, if you are a fan of Chinese martial arts, you may have seen the World WUSHU Championships. We were just in Russia for that 6 weeks ago. This is a little different, Tony. How are the traditional championships, the Kung Fu Championships, different?
Well, some people also call the World Kung Fu Championships a festival of Chinese martial arts, where we have an opportunity to see an even broader range of the diverse styles of Chinese martial arts. As you can see here, within this venue, there are at least 6 carpets that competitors are competing on. The other big difference is that we are looking at the handset and weapons routines, the Taolu routines. At the WUSHU World Championships, we also have Sanda, and so we don't have the Sanda competition, the combat aspect of WUSHU Kung Fu here at the World Championships. But Robin, I'm not sure that we have room to have combat here. We have so much going on during all of our sessions. It's really an action-packed competition.
We will open with the men's Group B Wing Chun, which is a short-range style
Yesterday, Robin, we saw a lot of the long-range styles, a lot of what we call Chang Chuan or extensions. Today, we are in store for quite a few of the short-range and also hard styles. So we'll see Wing Chun, we'll also see Nan Chuan, we'll see Chole Foot, which is a combination of both, and we'll also, I believe, see some Nan Chuan, traditional Nan Chuan.
This will be very interesting as you look at the 11 competitors this morning in Group B, Wing Chun. They are exclusively from the Ukraine and Russia.
Well, it's probably a function also of that particular category of competitions. The other distinction that we have here that's different than the WUSHU World Championships is we have many other divisions that are separated by age groupings here, whereas the World WUSHU Championships has very specific age limits. Here you have broader categories, so you have small children and then some of our more senior competitors also competing in the same style.
I think you described it literally with perfection. One word, perfection, when you called this a festival of Chinese martial arts, because it really has felt like that. These individuals are absolutely in competition. The judges will score them. There will be a first place and a third place and a fifth place, but it is so much more than that, as we've seen throughout the city over the early part of the week, people sharing their martial arts, celebrating their martial arts, people from all different countries in parks practicing together. It has been an incredible thing to see.
Our opening sequence really highlighted how many of the martial arts competitors from different corners of the world come together and took some amazing photos there, have an opportunity to share in this community of martial arts.
I was thinking the exact same thing as I was watching that open, that the Federation did a beautiful job of telling the story there. And if you haven't seen it, you can go right back to the beginning and watch it again. We will be underway shortly.
It looks like we may have Shamardan Bodan from the Ukraine and also Mr. Yaroslav from the Ukraine coming up.
And they are grouped by age, but as you get into this Group B, as you move into teenagers, you can be 2 or 3 years apart, and a huge difference in growth and size.
Sure.
Well, I think we'll see that here. I have personally truly loved seeing multiple performers on the carpet at any time. Being able to, move your vision between very small detail, looking at one person's foot or stance or hand, and then blurring your vision and looking at a large scope and comparing the two and kind of absorbing their performance together has been really, really beautiful.
And our panel of judges, of the 8 judges, will look at both competitors throughout their routine to capture the scoring for their balance, their speed, their coordination, their martial intent. And we have our first competitor of the morning coming up. First 2 competitors here.
And of the 2, now we see the difference in sleeveless and the short sleeves. Which one is the more traditional garb of the Wing Chun?
Well, they both, many would probably say the sleeveless is, but as long as he has short sleeves there, it's fine.
When you describe it as a hard style and short range, you can really visually put that into your mind.
Sure, and it looks like our other competitors already completed his form while we have Shamardan still moving. We can see the short range technique on three different imaginary opponents, blocking, striking, thrusting, spearing.
And maybe even a fourth as he moved behind him there for a moment. And this young man, as he's learned this, when you mentioned martial intent, he will have learned this with the understanding of which block would be used against what strike, and visualize this as combat, would he not?
That's the intent. That's the martial intent. Many people have seen the sort of wooden dummy with protruding arms that these techniques are often practiced on to build the musculature and bone density there for the competitors. And
Mr. Yaroslav, you're right, finished very early.
It was a moving competition, so we saw one stationary routine and one moving routine.
Are there low stances or frequently low stances in Wing Chun, or is it primarily an upright?
No, this is primarily this middle stance, and that's what we have an opportunity to see here. You see a little bit of the difference in maturity, also a moving form. We talked about this. There are some routines yesterday, we talked about this, Robin. There's some routines that have perhaps 100, more than 100 movements, and then there are other routines that have a smaller number of movements. This festival of Chinese martial arts that doesn't have the same requirements around time that some of the other compulsory routines have, allow us to see variation in Taolu routines or handset routines.
And these are, so far, short and very intense.
Well, the style, that's the great thing about the World Kungfu Championships, allowing us to see the variety, because these practitioners of Wing Chun have an opportunity to compete within a Wing Chun division, recognizing that there are Wing Chun routines that stay in one area, that are fairly stationary and change directions, and others that maybe move, as opposed to some of the forms that we see that move across the entire span of the carpet. We still have an opportunity to see balance, fluency of movement. Here, the short-range power executed.
The direction that his toes are pointing are almost exclusively forward, I've noticed, in all of the competitors, in the direction that he's facing.
Well, this primarily is a thrusting, as we can see, a thrusting movement. So most of the movements thrust out, and he's using a kick that is a thrusting kick, a heel kick or a push kick.
And a beautiful element to the style so far, and we will see other groups in Wing Chun after this, is the squared hips. There's a lot, you can see the power generated in the forward squared hips.
It's a great observation, Robin.
In a lot of cases, we think about a stance with 1 foot back or hips bladed, but in this style, it's the beautiful power is generated from that squared stance. Although in his case, you see the hip bone pushes forward a little more as he thrusts. One of the elements that throughout now into day 2 that really is showcased, and I know it is something that when you talk about the festival of that is the Kung Fu World Championships, has been how different. And it's, you mentioned it already today, and we talked about it a lot yesterday, but just how incredibly diverse the Chinese martial arts are.
Yeah, there are just hundreds and hundreds of styles, and styles that are variations on some of the traditional styles. So the Festival of Martial Arts actually allows, of Kung Fu Championships, actually allows us to see this variety. It's one of the times that martial arts competitors can actually come and enjoy a range of martial arts that they might not see in their respective countries and training halls.
Now, martial arts fans who've trained or seen movies often imagine as these men pull their fists back, they come back to about the belt height. And here we're seeing the upper rib cage. Why is that as part of the style?
Well, you know, every one of the martial arts styles has their preferred target areas, and it just happens that Wing Chun pulls back a lot stronger. There's tremendous focus on sort of this chest area. Many of the techniques, as you mentioned earlier, are to the upper part of the torso. We do see some strikes to the lower part and even blocks and kicks, but a lot of the striking area is of that upper part of the torso or face.
And as one, there's a little arena that an opponent or the style starts to target, logically the defensive systems would start to protect that area.
We see some of the internal breathing also in the movements is also a characteristic of Chinese martial arts.
And even within this style, look how different this individual looks, Chun from Canada. There are a lot of Canadian competitors here as we move into the men's Group C. But you really see the Canadian is, although clearly within the same world of Wing Chun, quite different than what we saw earlier.
And those are those variations, Robin. We still see the same types of kicks and also kicks to the shin area, parrying lots of the spears that we saw earlier, blocking.
These are the non-combative exhibition forms and exhibitions of style, but you can imagine the specificity of combat in close combat that Wing Chun, masters.
One of the things that the traditional forms allow us to see, Robin, is the variation when people attempt to use those movements in more combat areas. So we've seen some of the blocks that you will see often in combat sports, obviously different when people have gloves on, but some of the same blocks that we will see when techniques are moving into the body. Wing Chun is a great style for us to see. Short range movement that protects the opponent and also generates power from a short range, which is characteristic of Wing Chun.
And in the world of combat sports these days, you hear a lot of movement towards attack and defend simultaneously. And you see that very evident here in almost every movement. There's an address. They address the defensive nature of some type of block or parry as well as striking. Can you trace this martial art back to its approximate date when it would have started to take root?
I can't give you a specific date, Robin, but...
historians can get you within 20 to 50 years?
Some of the styles that you see, people talk about Wing Chun and its connections to especially some of the nuns that practiced martial arts in the temples. So obviously there are variations of the styles that have come after that.
And as a generality, martial, of course, meaning military or for fighting purposes, well, most of these developed, an oppressive people developed a way to combat the oppressors with an open hand.
Some of the styles, the origins of Kung Fu have always had health rendering aspects. When you see these styles with the thrusts and especially the variations in the palm. Obviously, those are not effective unless you've done some of the external and internal conditioning to generate power, especially when we talk about short range. The short range power takes a good deal of practice in order to generate the kind of control of breath as well as the execution of power from a short range.
And although even when we call it hard style, you can see the gentleness with which there is a flow into the moment of tension. And that breath must be a huge part of that.
Sure, you can see it with some of the competitors that are able to align their breathing with their striking. But yes, an important principle in Chinese martial arts is the soft and hard combination.
Lee and Young, two Canadians here. And as we go throughout the days here, we will focus in and out of the competition, and it is important. We will have a winner in the men's Group C, but as we examine the martial arts and we examine the history and the culture and the sharing and the ideas here, it is about so much more than just the competition itself.
Well, that is the nature of bringing so much together under one roof, just thousands of competitors. And it's not a matter of which style is better than another style, but really the execution and looking at the athlete and how the athlete's able to execute the spirit and intent of that style.
Zach Beauchamp from Canada, I believe will be our final competitor in the men's Group C. You can see a real change in this hand positioning from some of the others.
This is also moving in multiple directions as well. But you see an execution of power that's a little bit different for Zachary as well. Looks like we're moving on to Ellison Costa and Choi Foot. And Choi Foot is one of those southern styles that combine some of those long-range techniques, chopping, swinging arms, but also it's actually a combination of three styles: Choi Gar, Lei Gar, and Foot Gar.
You see much more movement, and they will drop that stance lower. It does feel like a hybrid, as you see some thrusting, some rotating, higher and lower. Beautiful footwork.
Sure. You see the stances from the handwork from Choi Gar, Lei Gar, and also from Foot Gar. We call it a sort of Buddha's palm. So you saw a lot of the striking, open hands, fingers spread. Two great forms from these gentlemen from Brazil, Ellison Costa and Anthony Capelazzo.
Yeah, nice start. And we keep moving here. You will see throughout the day. Very modern in our presentation that we move from one right into the other. We will have another Brazilian, I believe, and a Russian on the carpet right after.
Vadim Astafev from Russia and Marco Jr. from Brazil.
Capelazzo, they saw as the standout of the two. There you see the hardness of Astafez's style and the height. Beautiful. American junior. Very dynamic.
Yes, sort of a classic Chole foot style. The other, Vadim looks as if he, there it is.
And to combine these three styles, one would imagine that over time, somebody traveled and mastered multiple styles, or groups of martial artists traveled and began to master and combine these multiple styles.
Typically what happens is there are Choi Gar styles, Lei Gar styles, and foot Gar styles. And it wasn't unusual for masters to go and learn and share technique and then develop pull techniques that they think fit well together and create this hybrid style of Chole foot, which is really proliferated around the world, as you can see, both in Russia and also in Brazil. Brazil has a rich history of Chole foot. And also in the U.S. We'll look to see whether we have any U.S. competitors in Chole foot.
And when you combine any multiple things, you get something different than the sum of the parts. When you put 3 flavors into a chili, you don't just get those 3 flavors, you get a brand new flavor.
Well, there are a lot of movements that we'll see in Nan Chuan that are very reminiscent of the techniques that we see in Chole foot. Some of the movements, it looks like competitors have added some of the ground fighting techniques that we will see at times that look more like what we see in some of the contemporary Nan Chuan styles.
I think if I went to somebody in the West and I said Kung Fu, what might come to mind would look a little like Chole foot to an average Westerner. This is what they imagine, I think. The large movements. But let's talk for a moment about that term Kung Fu. WUSHU is the literal translation of martial arts, and that is the word that we use to describe Chinese martial arts. Where did the word Kung Fu ever come from?
Kung Fu actually is a term that means to do something well, to have great skill. So often people would refer to mastery as good Kung Fu. And so it's sort of borrowed, but you are correct, WUSHU is the official term for Chinese martial arts. And Kung Fu actually refers to the mastery of that. So, but we've used this for so long that many people, especially folks in the West, also know Kung Fu as this term related to martial arts.
There's some who say that it was an improper translation in a movie in the 60s or the 70s, where the West started to believe that Kung Fu was WUSHU.
Well, this term, there was a popular series in the West, but it's not uncommon to Little Drunken Style there. It's not uncommon for people to still, especially in the West, where they saw this very popular series that was connected from the Shaolin Temple, and that's what they knew as Chinese martial arts. Years ago, one of the breakout movie stars played in a series as a partner to American sort of, not superhero, but action star, Batman and Robin had Chinese martial arts skills, but many people didn't know what it was that Robin, who was Bruce Lee, was doing. Pao Choi, pushing that we will see often in Nan Chuan, double palm strike.
So this is the Group C Hung Gar now that we've moved into. Mr. Wong. What would differentiate Hung Gar?
Well, many of our viewers will notice that they will see a lot of the similar punches that they saw in Choi Lei Foot in Hung Gar, but definitely characteristic of Hung Gar as a Southern style. You actually see one of them now. You see the gentleman with the rings, these heavy rings on his forearms.
And the sound is coming through, you can't hear it.
Right, but the rings really help to strengthen the arms, to build these types of strong movements in the arms, which is characteristic of Hung Gar. These low stances, lots of strong fist techniques. We might see some others with the rings. You will see forms where the rings are required. I've learned a form, 5-ring form, and then others, same techniques, but without rings. Hung Gar, this double palm is characteristic of Hung Gar. Also this block and punch, simultaneous block and punch. So the stamina and strength that it takes to complete the form with the rings on obviously is quite different and an important training aspect.
Mr. Kyung moves into second. There is a very obvious body conditioning. And Kai Yan moves to first with the ring techniques. You see a real body conditioning element. There's no question as you look at these Chinese martial artists, their bodies over time from just training the martial arts, you imagine the strength that his core and legs are developing.
Well, this is what we're seeing now. You saw the early breathing techniques in our competitor here from Macau, I believe.
Yes.
So you see intermittent throughout the form, this internal conditioning and the breathing. Also in Hung Gar, one of the characteristics are the sounds that are made in the form, and the sounds actually help to stimulate various organs, parts of the body. But you see the fists are very strong. You see that type of pao choi or sweeping movement, but many of the techniques are these straightforward punches. Hung Gar is that family style, Hung family style, and this is some of the breathing techniques that you'll see. Pushing.
Yeah. You can feel a lot of it is about creating power, the expression of the sound, the stance.
You also see the way they traverse. Some people will tell you that the southern styles that were developed in southern parts of China, where the area, the terrain was not as flat, and so the styles typically use this sort of short, grabbing techniques of the ground to maintain stability versus some of the northern or long fist styles that traverse the carpet in different ways. So that's something that you notice. It looks like we've moved into women's Nan Chuan, traditional Nan Chuan. So you'll see many of the movements that you would have seen in Choi Lei Foot and also in Hung Gar. You'll see some of those same techniques in traditional Nan Chuan. Nan meaning southern fist.
There's a fluidity, an inherent fluidity to Nan Chuan.
We have our competitor Chandwadakar from India.
And are these traditional forms from start to finish, or are they combinations of choices that they've built themselves?
These traditional Nan Chuan, these Nan Chuan forms are forms that can be optional forms that are developed, but they only use southern techniques, southern fist techniques.
fascinating, one of the things you said earlier about when you imagine the development of a style, and if the terrain that you're standing on will dictate how you move around and how the style itself, how the mobility, is it unstable and you need to stabilize it? Or is it flat and safe that you can move around it? That idea, as soon as that enters your mind, that is a fascinating little rabbit hole you can dive down.
Well, you'll notice even when the southern stylists move, and here you'll see in traditional Nan Chuan covering the carpet. This is a technique, one of the few aerial kinds of techniques that you'll see traditionally in Nan Chuan styles. You'll see ground fighting in the Nan Chuan styles.
And that flying kick where we end up on the ground, is that imagining that we are striking an opponent who has fallen, or are we striking them and then moving to the ground?
No, moving up and then coming down on top of the opponent, striking on top. You will see sometimes sweeps from the ground in Southern style that's sweeping your opponent down. But that technique is actually from the opponent jumping up and over and coming down with a kick on the opponent.
I believe in purple, the young lady from Taipei, and in red from Poland, Julia. Poland. Word you used yesterday as we were talking, even when you do look at two people performing the exact same form, a traditional form, or the exact same technique, that there's a little flavor, just that personal expression, something in how they feel or the emotion with which they're expressing or their physicality. It just gives it each a little tinge of their individuality.
Sure. That is also a part of the art in the martial art. That expression. Here it looks like we may be back to some Wing Chun.
Maricoda here in the Nan Chuan category.
Yes, but it's clearly Wing Chun.
We have seen yesterday some combinations where they would be, into a category with a little bit of a looser categorization, and it's fascinating because then you get to see either back to back or on a carpet side by side the true difference. But yes, you can see here. If you are the competitor and you're looking at the people before you and the people after you, you must make it irrelevant and just go out and express your performance. I was watching the competitors come in today, and somehow on competition day, everything is a little different. Do you find even at this stage of your life, Tony, competition day, the food tastes a little different, you think a little bit differently?
Well, the one thing about a festival like this is you have people, and when you have multiple sessions, things are a little bit different, but for the first day of competition, there's always a type of electricity in the air. We can see it now that we're sort of underway with the competition. While we have just as many competitors around, we had some huge events yesterday, and we're still early and people are filing into the arena, but opening day of the competition is always very special.
Melody Wang from Canada. I'm from Canada, and I'm pleasantly surprised at the amount of Canadian traditional WUSHU practitioners we have here. They've been performing very well.
we see a lot of, here's the more traditional techniques, the elbow strikes, the breathing. Even when they traverse the carpet, it's short, strong movements in the stances to generate the power.
Belfren Lee and Melody Wang.
There's another, you ask about the uniforms, and here's something that you also will see often in some of the Southern styles, the wrist piece. We saw with one of our young competitors there.
Samut.
Some of the sounds that we talked about.
It really is, you know, as a viewer, when you're watching it, you can zoom in on any particular detail. Like just watch her hands, for instance, and you see the different shapes of the weapons and the defensive tools. Or you watch their feet or hips for a moment, and you can see how they travel through space.
Well, Nan Chuan also borrows a lot from this Hung Gar, so you'll see a few different shapes. You'll see a fist that's shaped like a panther. You'll see a tiger claw. You'll see push palms, as you see there. You'll see some of the traditional fists. So you'll see in traditional Nan Chuan a few different variations of hand techniques.
And the hands must condition over time as you work them in those shapes. The musculature and the shape of the hand will strengthen.
And that's part of why we continue to do forms, Robin. They allow you to continue. As you can see, there were blocks using the forearm for this young lady.
The word conditioning could be applied to almost anything with this. As you see them breathing, you know, conditioning the energy systems of the body, the physical nature of the body, the mind.
Here it looks like we have both Trele foot from Victoria Ng from the USA, and also Nan Chuan style over on with the other competitor.
Polish competitor. And I love these shots when you can see them both, as you start to see throughout the day all of the just different details, subtleties, sometimes subtle, sometimes very, very obvious.
Sure. I've had an opportunity to spend time with some great Kung Fu practitioners in Poland. Rich history of Trele foot, Hung Gar, Nan Chuan styles there, as well as internal styles. We've seen great WUSHU practitioners from Poland in the World WUSHU Championships, so a real richness of Chinese martial arts underway in Poland. A deep history in Trele foot there.
I loved it, Emilia from Poland's performance there. I'm going to ask our producers to tag that one. At the end of the day, they asked me to find some of standouts of the day, and the diversity of hers here, of Emilia's, is remarkable. See if the judges liked it. They didn't enjoy it as much as I did.
That was Victoria Ng from
yes.
the USA. So we'll see if they show us.
Oh, they did. They did enjoy it. Yeah. She moves into fourth. There are some of those hands forms and shapes of the fist and the blades, the animal shapes. Extremely light on her feet.
Yeah, this is one of the optional
Beautiful to watch, flowing yet very, very intense. You can see her focus. And again, when you put them side by side, both beautiful and both elegant in their own way, but so different.
Here's some of the breathing techniques and movements, trained conditioning for our competitor here, Cameron Hale from the U.S., Wing Chun form.
We spoke to Cameron yesterday, and in fact, Wing Chun is something she only migrated towards about 6 months ago when she blew out her ACL. She used a different style and was worried she couldn't come to the World Championships, and then she moved towards Wing Chun, which doesn't have as much movement, so her damaged ACL didn't take stress. It really shows the differences. There you see Cameron there. Imagine with this form, instead of worrying about the stability of her knee, she's able to express this different style.
Here we have a competitor from Iran. And it also looks like...
maybe Romania?
Perhaps from Romania. Obinu.
Yep. There will be our last
Very
two.
Strong Wing Chun technique.
Final two from Group B, traditional Nan Chuan.
Good technique. Very clear and strong technique. Using your waist well from Romania.
Saw the moments where the breathing came in just at the right rhythm between the striking and the retracting.
This competitor from Iran with the traditional Nan Chuan, still growing in her development of Nan Chuan.
What a great experience to come to China and be able to show your martial artistry and see the level around you.
That's an important aspect. As referenced earlier, Robin, the notion that you can come and see so many good competitors to give you a bar to reach for, and that's an important part of learning martial arts, to have different pictures in your mind. Of what excellence in a particular style might look like.
Right in front of you as you're on the edge of the carpet about to perform. It's beautiful. We move to the men's traditional Nan Chuan now.
Another competitor from Poland, Lukas.
Slovak.
Matus. Prison.
You see the beautiful shifting of weight distribution from side to side.
Here you see a dragon punch with his knuckle. You saw blocks with the hook. You'll see a tiger claw. You'll see uppercuts and punches that come over. So here's a real variation of traditional Hungar styles. His uniform is a very traditional Hungar uniform. You notice the lacing of the uniform is a little bit different.
These long fist styles that you see, they're sort of distribution of weight heavily onto the front leg and the reach. I'm seeing that more and more in combat sport competition around the world.
Well, the Hungar style that we saw from Matus is a short-range style. Lukas is a long guy. He's a big guy. So, and Matus currently is ranked #1 for this group that's just starting off. And we have some other Rauli from Georgia here. Great stances. And also Badiran from Turkey.
Truly.
In traditional Nan Chuan uniform.
From that crescent kick down into the roll. There's that attacking the downed opponent that you had mentioned and kipped to his feet. The Nan Chuan feels like we see it in stunts and movies a little more than some of the other martial arts in the world.
Well, Nan Chuan has this very expressive, kind of explosive punching. So it does fit well, but it really depends on the nature. We've seen, for example, in the Matrix movies, some people might not know that's Chinese martial arts, and you will see sort of beautiful soft styles in the movement as well. But Chinese martial arts presents such a plethora of techniques and styles that are showcased here.
Young American.
This is the compulsory Nan Chuan, old compulsory Nan Chuan routine that we see with Han from the USA.
And Nan from Hong Kong, I believe, as well.
Yes, he is showing a Nan Chuan routine as well.
There's some acrobatic natures to some of these men here in Group B. A little bit of flight, a little bit of tumbling.
Some of them are showing what we would call, Han is showing the compulsory routine, which is a very specific set of movements. And then others we will see where they have created a Nan Chuan, we call it an optional form. They have created a form and they add some of the acrobatics into the form, but still have that same sort of
good performances from both these gentlemen. There are 21 competitors in this division. So once your form is finished and you can just sit and watch and enjoy the artistry. But in many cases, as you see another great performance, you will notice you drop a little bit lower in the standings.
Well, this is a huge competition. So we have our competitor from Greece, Klavas from Greece. In traditional Nan Chuan form. There, Robin, you look to see the stances, the balance, the footwork, whether the opponents are able to generate power and stability from good stances. This is very classic Nan Chuan footwork that we see here.
It really is
Southern style.
Fascinating. Even the word traditional is a fluid word. There is some more traditional than others or more classic than others.
This is an opportunity for our viewers to see whether he's able to generate power, especially moving forward in these short-range punches. Also, whether he's able to grab and show the power in the technique. Is he able to use his stances also to create? It's a Hongar form. This motion is also characteristic of foot gar and hung gar. You see it in trele foot. This young man is still emerging in his development of Nan Chuan. This is Klavas from Greece. The other score was for our competitor from the USA. Klavas scores 8.92.
Very nice. Well, you mentioned the young American here still growing and emerging. That is a lifelong part of martial arts. There is no perfection.
Well, they are competing in very challenging forms. So here we have young competitors. Pei Yun Tan from Malaysia. Some coaches will have their students learn these styles in order to develop their strength.
And with him, Yu Xiang Tang.
From Malaysia, it looks like.
They had listed
both from Malaysia.
A Bolivian athlete who's not taken to the carpet, so we have the two Malaysians together. They are younger than some of our other competitors in this group, but there is that flexibility.
It's something that you'll see in some of the traditional forms where they will bow in three directions. 1, 2, 3. We just saw one of our Malaysian competitors show this.
You talk about, you know, giving them a difficult form from very young to develop. You see how quick and strong these young men are.
But they both show really good stances and execution of power, so great performances for them.
And we have seen different groupings. I mean, when you have 3,000 competitors, and if you only have a small number of a younger group, they'll put them in with the older, or if you have a few odds and ends of little interesting martial arts, they'll put them together.
Sure.
There's Mr. Kai from Taipei. Now, every single competitor that we've had here on Carpet 2 through 2 days from Taipei has worn this purple uniform. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all from the same school, but that is one possibility.
Well, at this competition, a number of teams come as delegations, so it's entirely possible. It could be sponsorship, or they decide
as a
that
nation,
those uniforms, they will wear both of these competitors wearing the contemporary versions of Southern style uniforms that are sleeveless. The exhibition or performance nature has nice color for them. You see on one competitor, we very often see the black and red combination or black and white combination in terms of traditional Southern uniforms with trim.
good performance for both. See on the wide shot, the two together. Miguel Manichero from Brazil.
Do we have Caleb Yun from the USA out here also?
Yes. And they finish together. There's a variety of experiences that they're having. Some are just incredibly nervous, others relaxed. But when it's time to take to the carpet, they all just must go perform.
This is probably one of the largest competition stages for many of the competitors. Certainly, I can't think of many international competitions that have this same scope.
The amount of competitors, the amount of places from around the world, and then this beautiful location.
Nicholas Lee from the USA.
Very quick, sudden movements.
And Wei Yi Lee from Malaysia.
His feels a little more classic.
We're in this other traditional Nan Chuan or other traditional Southern Fist arena, so we will see a diversity of Southern styles. Some where they have developed choreographed routines, probably the case with Nicholas.
I have a feeling they'll like this one. There seemed to be one moment of hesitation I noticed, but in general. So 4th out of the 19 that we have seen. We will see our final 2 here in the other traditional Nan Chuan.
Kirill Kral.
Both from the Czechoslovakia, Jacob Mirtaski.
You see the shape of his fist, this sort of leopard punching.
His lean body type makes it, his entire expression of the style feel very different, very unique to him. In combat, long and lean creates some very particular advantages.
It looks like we're about to start our women's divisions of Nan Chuan, Robin.
Low that stance is for a tall man. Strong. This hall has been rammed the entire time. Of course, tons of competitors and their families, but also people from all around Sichuan province. Mirtaski finishes, and that will be a wrap at the end of the sessions. We will look back at the top placement, International Women's Group C in the traditional Nan Chuan. Young women. There will be 20 in this division. Queenie Lee from the United States.
Peichi Lai from Malaysia, sharing the carpet.
We have not seen a single collision in this World Championships. And you see how much they move. But that awareness of where you are in space is a part of the artistry. And there is a perfect example.
One competitor is showing compulsory Nan Chuan routine, which will move back and forth across the carpet. Peiqi Lai.
Beautiful.
Doing a slightly different Nan Chuan form.
And that pause there as she drops, is that a
That's
compulsory?
Her flavor.
It's
a compulsory form. Each of the compulsory forms has separate sections, so you often will see the competitor either take a second where they gather their breath before moving on to another section, or just for effect in the form martial intent.
I was saying we can zero in as viewers on any detail and learn and be curious about it. And one of them is rhythm. You know, you see there a pause. These are not a 4/4 beat like in drumming. They're very, very off rhythm. And there's a lot of ands and pauses in the rhythm.
We should have Su Ling Ki and Chu Hyo Yan, both from Malaysia. Su Ling Ki from Malaysia and Chi Hyo Yan from Macau.
And what is that? We call it butterfly kick?
Butterfly kick. Good job, Robin. You will be a Chinese martial artist.
Well, I have truly, as a global martial arts fan, I have really fallen in love with the Chinese martial arts over the last number of months. I have you to thank for that, among other things. But being this deeply immersed in the Chinese style, you just can't help but see its beauty. But you also see how, particularly in the West, it is overlooked a little bit or misunderstood or not recognized for its real effectiveness in combat, but also in strengthening the body and in what it does for your mental and emotional and philosophical view of the world?
Well, like in many countries here, as evident, Chinese martial arts is truly a global sport. We haven't always had the platform for people to see just how many folks around the world are engaged in sort of such a wide array of Chinese martial arts. And thankfully broadcasts like this allow people to see just how representative Chinese martial arts is within the broader martial arts community around the world.
As a North American, I'm thrilled to see all of the Canadians here and 173 U.S. competitors. That is a beautiful thing to see. Because as we worked together in Russia 6 or 8 weeks ago, there are parts of the world where Chinese martial arts are so deeply ingrained, and I think some of us believe that the West was not one of them, but very much it is, and South America as well. We've seen some great South American Chinese martial artists.
We have Chinese WUSHU competitions. If our viewers go to the international IWF, International WUSHU Federation website, there are competitions throughout the year in every corner of the world. The African championships, the Polish championships, the European championships, Southeast Asian. There are so many competitions, but with with the evolution of technology that allows us to capture these competitions, people can actually see them now more and more.
Which is an incredible thing, that you take something, you know, almost ancient in its beauty and its tradition, and then as time goes on, the modern technology allows it to break out even further.
Many, many martial artists have an opportunity through the internet to see and learn even more about the styles that they're studying. Here in a competition, they have an opportunity to go out on the carpet and show their best to the judges and obtain feedback around how they're doing on a world stage. More importantly, they have an opportunity to exchange technique with competitors, and especially for these competitors who have never been to an international competition, have a once-in-a-lifetime experience and hopefully develop some connections and friendships with people that they will continue to see throughout their careers. We have from Russia, Tatiana, one of Russia's top competitors there.
You mentioned martial intent being one of the things to look for. This is martial intent. And at the World WUSHU Championships, at the World Juniors,
Tatiana.
At many of these competitions, we also have Sanda, the full contact combative form of WUSHU. And you really see how these traditional and modern techniques are applied in combat. I was so permanently impressed by the Sanda. But not having it here allows us to examine the martial arts in a slightly different way, and it also creates that celebration and festival environment.
True, Robin. Sanda is a beautiful competition in and of itself. But Sanda is also one of those competitions where, and just like in some other competitions, you have to conform your technique to the rules of that particular event. Here, you can show a Wing Chun form of your style as long as it fits within Wing Chun, and your competitor on the carpet can show another branch of Wing Chun.
And we at
Olena from the Ukraine, and I don't know, did we see Tatiana's score?
I don't know that we saw it. We were pretty immersed in many of the aspects, and it may have come past us. But also at the World WUSHU Championships, the Taolu competition was judged in a much different way than this one is. Why is that?
Well, the Taolu competition, again, evolution of the sport, where for the World Championships in WUSHU World Championships in Taolu, the forms have varied between compulsory forms and also optional forms. And as we can see with such a broad range of techniques, so for example, good example is at the World WUSHU Championships, the only time that we will really have two competitors on the floor at the same time is during the Tai Chi Chuan, Tai Chi Jian competitions. Here, we have competitors share the carpet, but if some of our competitors needed to use the entire carpet, we'd have a lot more collisions. At the WUSHU World Championships, what they have done is said you can show a Changchuan style as long as your style, your form meets these particular parameters, and they've established parameters for what we call difficulty movements, non-do, and other criteria related to judging the form that are very, very stringent. And so you need to often make sure your form conforms to those. Here, these competitors, and also a time frame. We've seen forms that have lasted maybe 30 seconds, forms that have lasted a minute and 20 seconds. It's very hard to compare those competitors when one is spent twice as long in their movement. So as the form evolves, we have an opportunity where we say, let's provide some parameters on that. Your form has to be at least this long, can't be any longer than this. It can't have too many of the non-do movements there, and really develop some of the parameters that allow you to judge two competitors that are both performing Chung Chuan.
And
so this is something.
It allows us to judge at a best of the best type of level where the champions from regions may go compete, whereas here it's a little bit more inclusive because of the diversity with the judging. The judging allows that diversity, I believe.
Well, this festival allows a diversity of, for example, you have Wing Chun. You don't have a Wing Chun division at the WUSHU World Championships. So the competition itself lends itself to a specific set of rules. Same thing for Sanda. Sanda competition says you can come from any background, but you have to understand that these strikes are legal strikes, these target areas are legal target areas. Some of these styles, their forms actually strike areas that will be illegal target areas. So unless they're willing to conform that, they might feel at a disadvantage in Sanda competition. If you compete in a form that is not as long, it doesn't go for a minute, you'd be at a disadvantage, and they would actually have deductions taken in the WUSHU World Championships. So it really is a different set of criteria, but it still is a competition that says your forms have to be connected to Chinese martial arts. And there's such a wide range of Chinese martial arts. What they don't say is that it has to only be Wing Chun, it has to only be Choi Foot. They said it has to fit within the character of Nan Chuan styles, Chung Chuan styles. So they say Southern Fist or Long Fist. We have added some traditional styles, Bagua and also Baji. So even in the WUSHU World Championships, they have begun to incorporate some other, they've always had Daoshu and, or broadsword and straight sword and spear and staff, but they also now have Quan Dao. They also include in the competition some other weapons that we have not traditionally had at the WUSHU World Championships. So the competitions continue to evolve also.
We will see some incredible weapons today and in the final day at the World Kung Fu Championships. I've seen some of the athletes preparing their weapons, and there's some incredible traditional weapons.
Sure.
Here we see from Indonesia, Cow, and from Algeria, Dikira. This is the Algerian artist, I believe.
So Algeria? Maybe our Brazilian or India. With our competitors from possibly Macau and Poland coming up next. Karmajit. And from Brazil, Tamaris.
So Macau and Poland, as you said, I believe.
Halayu from Macau. And Katarzyna Zinia. Migdal from Poland. Poland in the blue uniform and Hal in the yellow uniform. The great thing about having such a range of martial artists is that you'll see, and for our viewers, have an opportunity to see what it means to have a strong stance and generate the power in some of these short-range punches from your stance versus some of our competitors or athletes that are still growing, and you don't see the kind of explosive power coming from their stances, and that's just a part of their development. Generating the power from the waist and having a very strong stance to allow you to have sort of those roots to generate power. Looks like we have a competitor from the Republic of South Africa, again showing the diversity of Chinese martial arts throughout the world.
She will be up in just a moment. I think she'll be on the carpet.
Emeishan is there.
Oh, there she is. And she gets the carpet to herself as the last performer. We saw a number of martial artists from the Republic of South Africa yesterday. Earlier today, you are competing against yourself. Whether there is somebody on that carpet or not, it is immaterial. It is just competing against your best performance, your best ability.
And that's the great aspect of the judging. The judging really giving you an opportunity to see how does your fluency balance power, speed, coordination, martial intent. So it's here, great cheering from her crew over in the Republic of South Africa.
The teams, watching the team support their artists has been so joyful. Our cameras can't be everywhere at once, but you can see flags waving, you see teams all together. We move into the men's Group C, other Nan Chuan.
Competitor from Altashev from Russia, and also Ahmed from Pakistan.
Whenever one of the categories says other, I always am interested because you see the real difference, and you see the two here. You see just how different.
Well, our Russian competitor is showing an optional form of Nan Chuan. Our Malaysian competitor showing a more traditional Nan Chuan form there.
Good work. You can see the fatigue. He enjoyed that work. Good strong moments for him too. He should be proud of that. See who our next two are. Very fast.
Zhu from Hong Kong. Again, an optional Nan Chuan form. Still Nan Chuan, choreographed to pull movements from various Southern styles, and then Mitchell from Australia.
Small movements with his feet, little small subtle footwork.
This is clearly a training form to train his movements in Nan Chuan.
In slow motion, you really see that whipping nature of the soft through to the hard.
Well, for a long time, people believed that you couldn't have this fast, sweeping, explosive power in Nan Chuan. And watching the evolution of Nan Chuan, traditional Southern fist, to the evolution of some of the performance Nan Chuan that you see in the optional forms, like we saw with our competitor from Hong Kong, you can see that you still can have explosive power and speed in a style that's typically thought of as hard.
He moves into first. That was beautiful. That slow motion really showed you, the change of expression. United States. The young man in the back seems to be doing the same training form as the other young man from Australia.
Mitchell from Australia.
Let's see if he is the Australian.
I wonder if he's G.
Yes,
G
he is.
Yes.
Yes, he is. So good to see these Australian martial artists. And although it's a training form, which will have simplicity, you can master this early form, can you not? You could dedicate your life to
You can see
master
some of the distinctions in his performance versus Mitchell's performance. So.
American.
Looks like Alex is.
Love these slow motion shots as you just look at that little elastic whip of the body.
While we wait for their scores, we probably also have our next competitors on the carpet waiting. Alex Chun, 9.14.
Right behind the young man from Hong Kong we saw earlier. We have
G, 8.71.
Very good.
Ayush from India. Showing us his Nan Chuan form, and it looks like we have a more traditional form from Lee Kwai Yun from Hong Kong.
You see the cleanliness of this performance here.
Well, here Lee also is still developing in his strength related to these punches. Southern style was one of my early styles, one of my first Chinese martial arts styles, Robin, actually. So a lot of background in Southern style martial arts, and great friends and competitors who practiced trolley foot, so I had an opportunity to see some incredible trolley foot early in my competition career. Some great trolley foot schools in California, and some of our largest competitions in the U.S. were in California and New York. Rich history of Southern styles in New York as well. There's a famous martial arts practitioner, martial arts movie star, and I remember watching him as a kid in one of my early competitions in New York, Donnie Yen, before he was a movie star, watching him compete in New York City. Characteristic low stances. We actually saw a backflip there. Jump outside kick.
A backflip into a low stance, and he stuck it. Little adjustment there on that land. Yemen.
So some of those, one of the distinctions is with the international rules, there is a specific deduction for that problem with balance in landing the technique that the judges automatically take off, reduce the score. So when those penalties occur, you ask about some of the distinctions in the World WUSHU Championships in Taolu. Whereas you don't have those same automatic deductions here in the judging.
The Taolu at the Worlds in Russia was just incredible. It was absolutely incredible. But I must be honest, there's something about this sort of performance festival atmosphere that I'm enjoying even more. The sort of desire to share and show what you've done and watch each other, that is part of what was that little adjustment is what you were talking about.
Well, you know, there are two different types of competitions. The World WUSHU Championship and what we see in terms of this festival of World Kungfu Championships. We still will see a high level of competition. But we may see a range here at the festival, or people who are still developing. We see a range in the WUSHU World Championships from some of the countries, but we also see countries that have had extensive depth in going to the World WUSHU Championships, and they have experience, and we see that it play a part of where they continue.
We also see children here, we see seniors here.
That's true. That's a distinction in the World WUSHU Championships. We have two separate events. We have Youth World Championships, and then we have the Adult World WUSHU Championships. Here at the World Kung Fu Championships, we have both of those age groupings here. The other thing that we've mentioned, which is incredible, is that at the World Kung Fu Championships, we have a few age categories that you can compete in versus the very specific age limitations or age parameters at the World WUSHU Championships.
And I do think this here, you know, for a 76-year-old competing in the morning and a 4-year-old competing in the evening does add to that festival, that culture and friendship that is a part of the World Kung Fu Championships.
Sure. We have Brian Hutchinson from the U.S. just completing his form.
And Prashant right here.
Prashant from India.
Both showed, you know, their skill and their artistry, but they're perfect examples of what you were talking about, that earlier in their, you know, martial arts evolution, they can still come in here and compete.
Sure.
Kajun
from Malaysia. You see the tiger claws in his form.
And would that be for striking or for the potential of grabbing and trapping and grappling?
Striking and grabbing. And there's a back kick from the floor showing a very traditional form. if you look closely at some of the optional or contemporary Nan Chuan forms, you will see those same movements. But here you see them without some of the flash that we've come to see so often in our contemporary Nan Chuan forms.
When you take that flash away, you have to really show cleanliness of skill. There's nothing to hide behind. There's no flying through the air. There's no flash. You must just show beautiful technique.
Well, that's one of the things that, that's one of the other aspects that those rules in the World WUSHU Championships allow. If you include those difficulty movements or those non-do, you still have to show that they don't interrupt the flow of your movement. So they can't just be flashy, but they also should have some intent, and they should not interrupt the flow of the movement. So there are very specific requirements, and while some people might feel, oh, that's just flashy, if it's flashy but it interrupts the flow of your martial art technique in the form, you will receive a deduction for that as well.
So there is a risk
Sure.
in trying the difficult moves, as it should be. Man from
Thomas
Poland.
showing strong Hungar, Nan Chuan stances, you see, generating his power from, you see the coiling of his waist.
It's an incredible thing to just dedicate large portions of your life to developing power from the feet through the thighs and through the hips and into the coiled torso. You can see the subtleties of power.
Well, that's those those shorter training forms that we've seen where people are not worried about lots of different techniques in the routine, but really mastery of the foundations before they move into longer forms. One of my best friends and first friends from Poland is a Chinese martial artist who practiced Chole foot, named Thomas, actually. Who is one of the Sanda judges. So there's a rich history of Chinese martial arts in Poland.
But as a martial artist, you end up developing friends from all over the world, and the friendships begin with your sharing and your love of the arts and of the martial arts.
Well, you also see this camaraderie between the athletes as they leave the carpet and wish each other well, congratulate them on their scores.
Mr. Lee from Malaysia. And
Hengshan Lee from Malaysia.
And from Hong Kong,
Lee Chung Pong Bruce.
you can feel the power his hips generate.
Well, actually, Robin, his powers, while the movement, his arms are out, still not the same type of coiling power that we see with some of the other competitors. And we'll likely see it in a score that's not as high as some of the other competitors. Let's see what the judges saw. But this is part of that growth and development.
There's a Malaysian young man. And now that you mention it, you see the beautiful movements of his arms.
This movement actually is supposed to come all the way up before you push down. So he still is trying to develop what it means to have this short-range blocking movement. So the arm is out, but the judges have enough expertise to see.
Yeah. And through that training over time, your brain will actually develop neural pathways. You literally will reshape your brain to be able to do these movements in the way that, more and more perfection and a better and better path.
I think he doesn't realize that his score, we already his score up.
Young man from Sri Lanka, yes. Jiwan Maduranga.
We're in a new group here. The same group.
It's the end of
continuation
the
of the group.
We've seen a lot of Sri Lankan practitioners. Yue Lin. There's the three directions you had mentioned earlier, the traditional salute to three directions. And what would that signify? Potentially three individuals?
Yeah, it's just part of the tradition that people have had. There are some movements that have stayed with the forms and others that have not.
And to really trace back those, it could be three trainers or three masters, or practicing as if there were three opponents. It could be any.
No, it actually has some more cultural, sort of philosophical connections in Chinese martial arts. Looks like we've already moved on the carpet to WUSHU, to Broadsword, to our women's Broadsword. Our competitors will note a distinction in the Broadsword using these broad slashing movements, and we've moved here to one competitor on the carpet.
And among other reasons, one would imagine this is a safer approach. Have you trained extensively in the Broadsword, Tony?
Yes.
Beautiful.
We will see here at the festival some of the forms that are Broadsword forms that are more contemporary in the choreography of the Broadsword form, like the one that we're seeing here, and then other Broadsword forms that are more traditional. And you'll notice that they both have the characteristics of the chopping, slashing movements, but in the contemporary forms, the movement across the floor looks very different. You might even see some of the acrobatic movements in the form, often a butterfly or an aerial in the form, and then your traditional forms, maybe you'll see a butterfly in the form, but not as many of those acrobatic movements.
How much should we watch for, if any, a change of hands holding the sword?
You won't see a change of hands holding the sword. You'll see perhaps one competitor or judges just not ready. Typically, you'll see the Broadsword performed in the right hand. When you see the left-handed sword, it's when they're using double Broadsword. But I think in this division, we're just doing single Broadsword.
And when they go to put the sword away or put the sword not for combat, they pass that to their left hand then?
Yes, only at the beginning. So she has it in her left hand as she prepares to bow with the sword.
And at the end as well, she'll pass it back to that.
But not during Sometimes you will see an exchange while they execute a movement. If they need to slap with the right hand, you'll see that occur.
But she will not
But
attack
the
with
fighting with the sword is typically in their right hand unless they have double broadsword. So when I learned double broadsword, I had to learn how to use a sword in my other hand. So that's usually the challenge when you start to learn double weapons, but then there are other nuances to learning double weapons as well.
So as you go to learn the second weapon, will you train it at any time only in your non-familiar hand, or will you almost always now train with the two weapons? So originally you learn as a right-handed man, you have a right-handed broadsword. As you move to a two-sword scenario, will you ever train only in your offhand, or you'll always work with the two?
No, very often people will practice that hand so that they can concentrate on developing the blocks. And our performer from Canada, maybe.
Now we have an American, Tori.
Yes. There's a butterfly that I mentioned to you. Tornado kick.
So we see the stabbing and very much the circular slashing.
The thrusting, wrapping, these are the things you'll look for in broadsword. Thrusting, wrapping, chopping, slashing.
What is that movement?
This movement is parrying and blocking. So some of the same movements that you'll see with the staff to parry weapons away, this circular movement. In Chinese martial arts, you have a few directions. You have thrusting directions, you have up and down directions, slashing directions, and you have circular movements. So you'll see all of these types of movements in the broadsword. The difference with the broadsword, we'll see later in other weapons, the shape of the weapon used.
We will sometimes hear that the martial artist will use the weapon as an extension of their hand. How much of that is platitude and how much of that is accurate?
No, the weapon, what we mean in Chinese martial arts when we say as an extension of your body is still the power and the fluency in the movement comes from the body work. It comes from the footwork. So you'll see, you can tell the difference between a martial artist that's just using their arm versus a martial artist that's using the power and stability that comes from their stances. So
someone at home watching this has just been with us, say, and they've seen a lot of the martial arts throughout the morning. They imagine that their forearm would start to be challenged, but actually the balance, all of the stabilizers, the legs, the core, it all gets challenged in a different way than the empty hand.
Sure, but that's part of the practice. That's part of weapons development for athletes. It's very different just using your fist, a palm to punch, and now having a weapon. But one of the bigger issues, Robin, is now you have this appendage attached to your hand that you need to be aware of. It's not uncommon for people to poke or cut themselves as they're learning. So there's a level of awareness that's very different than when you're doing bare hand routines.
You live your entire life with what you have, the end of your finger, your foot, your elbow. You're familiar with that. It's always been there, but we put something in your hand, a weapon in your hand, that is unfamiliar from day one.
Sure, and there's a difference in the short and long range weapons. So now we're looking at a short weapon. You're watching the wrapping, some ground techniques as well.
The American Chinese.
Here's what I mentioned by some of the more contemporary forms where you'll see things like the aerial.
Beautiful camera work here that we can see all of the movement. And that sound that it makes, it adds this really dynamite element for our audience, but it's caused by the shaking of the metal of the blade.
It's caused by the shaking metal of the blade, but also the accurate execution. So you'll see that. And some of the swords, especially at the World Traditional Championships, will actually see swords that are much heavier, so you won't hear that same sound. The same way we talked about competitors who use the brass rings, some of them use heavy weapons specifically for training, conditioning purposes.
Young Michelle moves into first from Hong Kong. Let's say we take Young here and we hand her a heavier sword, and she's trained with this one for years. That would be some serious adjustment.
Sure.
For timing.
Here is a traditional broadsword, Robin, that you'll see that doesn't move in the same way, although this sword is made out of similar material, but traditionally it's made as very heavy.
So it is a
sword.
Thicker, heavier sword, but made of the same material.
But you don't see, as she's dressed in Shaolin, probably learned Shaolin styles, but still developing as a martial artist. So you see a different level of footwork that's from our France competitors, still growing. Laurent Gay.
Viewers who are watching and thinking that they'd like to try the Chinese martial arts, as soon as they see the swords, certain people will think, I want to try that.
Here we actually, it looks like she may have an oversized broadsword. That's something else that you'll see here. Can't tell.
It's moving so quickly.
You will see longer weapons also at the World Kungfu Championships. And the longer weapons usually are you'll see in these traditional, sometimes in straight sword, we'll see a two-hand straight sword, which has a longer grip.
And with the two-hand, it's, I would assume, much heavier?
Typically. Here, the movements you notice are very different than some of the other broadsword movements. So no, it wasn't a longer one. It's just that's her size. So it wasn't an oversized, a long broadsword. But a very good form.
There was an example of what you spoke of earlier, where she passed her sword out of her right hand to use the right hand as an open fist weapon, right, and then passed it back in to attack with the sword.
This form is the junior compulsory broadsword that we see in the youth competition for the youngest competitors. This is a compulsory form.
Camille from France.
There's the large broadsword that I was referring to, so it looks like we might actually see that
coming up maybe in a bit.
So at the World WUSHU Championships, you would see all of the young competitors, very young competitors, doing the same broadsword form, and the judges would judge their technique on the same form, and that's the difference in compulsory forms.
And man, when you are judging that same compulsory form, you must be able to just recognize the most subtle of imperfection or change or deviation.
Sure. Such great applause we hear from their teams. It's a nice thing about having your teams there in the stances. Camille from France.
We have seen the French team around. They are a fun group. Mila of Russia. There's that bigger sword. That first time you pick that up, it must be fairly intimidating. It's beautiful. Even that stance, as you kick that leg back and move that arm forward, the weight of that will alter the balance of your entire body when you first pick up that sword.
Sure.
But then you see over time as they develop. It's elegant.
She had very fluid movement.
It's got to be a certain amount of strength to just handle that larger sword.
Well, it's the strength, but also the fluency and strength of her legs to transition between stances.
Yeah, they enjoyed it, 8-8-8. See another French martial artist come up, I think.
Here is a more traditional broadsword, so you see the thrusting. Here where she's still developing. So you see the same flower, but she still is developing in the form.
They're committed to it.
Colette from France.
You see the little extra.
Sometimes she actually is holding her sword. It doesn't quite have orientation to the grip of the sword yet. She's still learning. The sword blade should actually be vertical and her sword is still flat, but she's still learning. She actually has her sword backwards under her arm right now, but she's young and still learning.
And loving it.
De Silva from Sri Lanka.
I believe she will be our final of the Group B Broadsword.
This form is actually a compulsory form that this is old compulsory broadsword. So some of these movements should be performed very, very fast. And those are the Nandu techniques that we talk about, the butterfly. Young competitors still growing in understanding how to execute these movements.
The idea that some of these forms you may practice for 5, 8, 10, 20, 30 years, you just think of how much you can grow in your ability to perform them.
This form was a compulsory form that you should have a certain level of mastery of foundations and movement. It's a very complex form to learn to execute well. So she still has a lot of room to grow. Here's another compulsory. Looks like it might have been a compulsory form.
The men's Group B broadsword. So young men.
Yeah.
nice and long.
He has likely been doing this form for a while. This is one of the compulsory forms that youth perform in international youth competition, the World Juniors competition.
He seems very proficient in it for someone so young.
Well, also he's trained this form to ensure that he doesn't have the kinds of deductions. So you'll see a level of precision with the way he executes the form. And he's a good practitioner.
And again, you can't help sometimes but think not just of how good they are when someone is young, but how good they will one day be if they keep training. I mean, you see potential of what could be. And it is an incredible thing to see. And a human being owes it to themselves to pursue that potential. When you see how good this young man is, how good could he be at 30 and 50 and 60?
Well, the great thing about Chinese martial arts is it does allow, unlike there are some forms that obviously as your body ages and your body changes that are just not well suited. But the beauty of Chinese martial arts is that there is such a huge range of other martial arts styles that you can practice to continue to allow your body to retain as much elasticity, flexibility, strength. And so you see that, as you mentioned, going to the parks and seeing so many seniors practicing martial arts, young people and seniors.
But it slows the aging process as well, by training martial arts. So eventually, whether at 50 or 80 or 87, you have to change and express it a different way. But that is slowed as you train.
Sure. Here we have our young competitor, Samarakun from Sri Lanka, again, with a compulsory form that is very, very advanced, that his young development in this form can still catch up and grow. Hopefully when we see him in years to come doing this form, it'll look different than what it looks now. This is a complex routine. It's one of the compulsory routines that adults used to perform in competition. We now have different compulsory routines for Broadsword.
Ian Bennett.
This looks like a form that maybe an optional form. Yes, an optional form that someone has choreographed or Ian has choreographed for himself. So you have some of those non-do elements.
We saw him compete yesterday in the open hand. Yes, I have a feeling he put this one together himself, and it's an expression of his personality, the flashiness that he wants to express. You see it's consistent with his uniform, the flames. This is what he wants to show. One-handed cartwheel, spin, low finish. performance. Second of the first three. Young Italian. Michelle Stefano Rupullo.
It's like he may be doing.
You ever been questioned crossing a border, bringing your sword or other weapons with you?
Yes.
It's something that they've probably all experienced.
I competed with hook swords, and now trying to go on the plane with things like hook swords where they don't quite understand it. Not so much of a problem, but I've actually even been in China, leaving China with things, and had to show martial arts to security there.
One might recommend you check your hook swords, but you want to protect them and take care of them. You hear the Italian team.
We didn't have, now there are cases that are conducive to traveling with weapons that are much better, but back in the old days we didn't have them, and you'd be in bad shape if you showed up at the competition and you didn't have your weapon. So
hard to do a weapons competition with no weapon. I can just imagine when I see these teenage men here, a little adjustment by Enrique there, when I see them with these swords at 14 or 15, if you put a sword in my hand, I would have been pretty excited.
So here's a case where you saw Enrique with a loss of balance on his form. So he will, loss of balance, again, this is what you see when you realize that there's still emerging development for these martial artists. You see in his footwork, his feet are not always flat, and these are things that he can work on and improve. They will improve his balance.
And every martial artist will seek continual improvement. That's part of the journey of it. And it starts with self-examination. Try to find what you can work on. I mentioned the teenager with the sword. I do remember buying a wooden sword by mail from Black Belt magazine in the early 80s.
Enrique from Mexico.
I've had so much fun chatting and talking to that Mexican team over these few competitions. There's Karel, Czech Republic.
We saw Karel earlier.
It's exciting to come in and have even more than one competition to be able to.
Well, most of these competitors who have come from a very long distance, like Karel, often have practiced and have bare hand, maybe even short weapon and long weapon routines, and a competition of this scope allows you to show both. Karel has actually just competed twice within the span of a couple of hours, but you condition, you train to prepare for that.
might practice the individual, the bare hand form on one day and the sword on another, but as you near competition, you will practice them both within a similar time frame of what you could potentially have to do them.
You have to have stamina for both. Possibly another French competitor, yes, Lancelot.
We saw him yesterday.
Again, still room to grow in his balance.
He competed on day 1 and 2, and maybe even with a long weapon on day 3. That's your best case scenario, I would think, in some ways. But in other ways, to have it all in one day sure makes for a really tense but fun experience to have that.
Well, like his possible teammate, still working on how to grab the sword properly. So those are some things that we hope they'll have an opportunity to look back at. As you mentioned, it's possible some of these athletes may have learned their routines fairly recent in preparing for the competition, but you see he's holding the sword.
We talked about earlier today, we were talking about how technology is sharing martial arts as it's sharing all things. And there are, and this wouldn't necessarily be true of these young athletes, but there will be some that pick up, a second discipline literally from the internet. That you're coming here to do your form that your open hand, your barehanded form that you've been training all your life, and you go on the internet and try to learn a weapon. That is possible.
It's possible. We try and tell people not to do that.
Yeah.
Try and tell them if you have if you're advanced enough, you can do that. But especially when if you've never learned that weapon, trying to learn something as complex as Chinese martial arts over the internet is not the best way to develop a good foundation. You will see, as you saw in some of those training forms, building blocks to learn the proper execution of footwork, balance. Also, learning on the internet assumes that you have a depth of knowledge to coach yourself,
or even understand the terminology that you're exposed to. And to learn anything, we can, as human beings, we can learn anything. Anywhere we apply deliberate practice, we can improve. But deliberate practice requires knowledge and someone to correct you and start you and take you step by step. And there is no substitute for somebody, a master, sharing those ideas with you in person.
Well, especially when you talk about learning a weapon, and we have a situation where there's always inherent danger in learning a weapon, but you want a coach that can guide you properly, so you minimize some of the risks of that. You don't have that when you're learning something for the first time on your own.
I think parents would appreciate our conversation. We started with recognizing the possibility that may exist, and then moved on to all the reasons one should not go that way.
Well, I spend a lot of time training children in Chinese martial arts and explaining to them why we won't start learning a sword before you learn how to balance on your feet when you move. And barehand, as we've seen yesterday, Robin, barehand movements can be very complex. So when you have the added element of a sword, here even for Mallory, our Tyler Mallory, some room to grow in learning the wrap for his sword, how you wrap the sword around your body.
Describe that wrap for us and its purpose.
Well, the wrap actually is a block around your body. It protects your body. So you'll see some of the competitors who wrap so that the tip of the sword comes far behind their back, and then others that only wrap just around the top of their head. So they've actually missed protecting part of their body when they wrap. So I'll make a point to show you when we have a competitor. There was just a slow wrap. Is this our competitor, Raul from, is this Raul from Mexico?
I think it's the Italian, young Patrizio.
Patrizio.
Some people, when they imagine a weapon, you think about hitting with it or stabbing with it or slicing with it or slashing with it. But a weapon can serve a purpose as somebody strikes you, and it becomes that bladed barrier between their hand or their foot or their body and yourself. You don't necessarily have to attack with it for it to serve its purpose. Artem from Russia.
So that's the slashing. Artem is showing us the wrapping around his body. You'll see when he wraps, the sword comes all the way around his back when he wraps. And here is one of the more traditional forms. And you see the linear movement of the form across the carpet.
And those traditional wraps on his calves. So in particular, you pointed out the wrapping, and that was just one element of a great performance as he moves into first. With only a few, 4 more, I believe, 4, maybe 5. Adrian from Mexico.
Adrian looks like he may be the brother of Enrique. Or they at least share a last name. Maybe a family member.
Chia, not the most common name, so family member, one would assume.
So here's an unusual way to hold his broadsword because it actually put the blade against his skin. But this sometimes happens when people come up with innovative movements.
Things that rules of thumb or rules in general, do's and do nots in martial arts or art of any kind, sometimes there's gold in there. Sometimes there's just a little nugget of gold somewhere in those things one tells you not to do.
Well, for the broadsword, where he held the broadsword, you won't see that because the broadsword is a single-edged blade, so
putting the blade against your skin is ill-advised.
You'll see when people hold the broadsword in their left hand, they're holding the backside of the blade, which is often used to block as well.
So we saw Artem from Russia move into first, the Italian in second, as we move to our final 4 competitors. Good field here. Group B, men's Group B broadsword. A little
under the knee.
Detail, Now this feels like a strong performance to me. And sometimes that's...
It's a very solid, very clean performance.
Liu from Taipei.
Good sword movement, good stances.
Strong landing. Aesthetically pleasing. I know that in scoring and judging is more complex than that, but they agreed. Liu moves into first,
Great smile.
which will move Artem to second, and we still have some strong ones, 3 more remaining. Vladimir Kamashev from Russia. Talking earlier, when you as a viewer just view it, zone into one thing, in his case that rhythm and how irregular it is, purposefully irregular.
Well, those traditional forms, you don't see the same type of movement around the carpet space in the same. They tend to be very linear, maybe 2 or 3 combinations together, sometimes even just one. But he showed a very strong form, should score well as well. Yes, second place.
So the young man from Taipei in first, and 2 Russians in second and third, with 2 remaining. Rustemov Attila, Kazakhstan. Young man. Graceful.
Yes, he is good balance, good stances, and clean movement.
So if you were training a young martial artist, those fundamentals is a great place to start focusing.
Oh, sure. We see evidence of it here.
That analogy of the foundation of the house is a very simple one, but a very concise one. You know, if you start with a strong foundation.
Right. You didn't see a lot of balance difficulties for him in the form. Solid movement, good wrapping techniques. So you can see that he had good foundation training. And it looks like he's a little disappointed with his score, but he actually did a great job.
He did. He's young. In a big field of 17. He did very well. John Wang.
So you see, he didn't display those kinds of balance challenges.
And early in a routine, you've got to, and he's doing a great job of it, stay focused. You can't worry about the past. That little stumble early has gone, but you have the rest of your routine to do still. Those psychological elements are such great training for life. You know, there'll be challenges, but you still have to go through. And he's doing a good job of that.
Sometimes John is back on his heels and still trying to navigate his balance.
Stability.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, those two together, and John did a beautiful job here, those two together maybe illustrate that conversation we were just having. He has much more complexity in his performance, but some of those foundational principles not quite as solid as young.
He's a teenager, he's still growing, so.
It's been a really great morning of martial arts, and we are down to our last group. It is not the... Mikel Arujo. I'm sorry, second last group. Phew. Not ready for it to be over yet. Women's Group C Broadsword. Raquel from Brazil.
So here's an example, Robin, when we saw earlier some of the breaks or pauses in the form that you don't see as much of. Now you see toward the end of the form for Raquel.
Are those little flags on the end, has that always traditionally been there? It's
Yes.
visually very, very pleasant.
Yes.
That has.
And we call them just that, the flags at the end of the sword. On the straight sword, you'll see a tassel there.
Wu from Taipei. Your initial feeling, you feel like she's been doing this for some time. Freezes on a dime. You can examine and then analyze all of these movements, and sometimes you just look at them and it's like listening to music or looking at a painting.
It's an optional routine, a form where you see some of the characteristics that you see in an optional routine with enough of a traditional flavor to the form. So you saw Chia Sin show clear, strong stances, sword movement.
Miharu Takeuchi. So the Group C are adults. We've seen the Group D in some events, as old as 60s and 70s, some of these martial artists. There are beautiful moments in some of these routines where, like, the arc of the shape of the sword will alter as it moves. Instead of one arc, it'll come down in one and then thrust out in a different direction.
That's an important characteristic of the broadsword that you've observed, Robin. Some of those changes in direction and blades you see, and changes in direction and use of the blade is what distinguishes some of the more advanced forms from the basic forms. So if you watch when the competitors were just showing the more basic routines, you don't see as many of those changes in direction. The kind of wrist action in the sword, the flowers we call it.
And of course, it's great control of the weapon, but great control of your body's movements. That brings it back to it being an extension of your body.
Here again, very clear stance movement, balance. So the motion of the broadsword, some of the basic wrapping, slicing movements are very simple form in that regard, but very cleanly executed. Should probably earn her a good score.
while we wait for her score, we look on.
Came up 8.82. Second place. Christine from Brazil. So you see she still has room to grow in terms of learning how to wrap the sword, and even some of the flowering movements and flowering behind her back where you hear the sword hit the body. Those are areas where you'll see her develop, balance.
And that development comes from work, comes from practice, deliberate practice, which comes from passion. If you love it, you will do it more, and if you do it more, you will improve. And if you find yourself at the World Kungfu Championships in Emeishan, China, you probably love it. So improvement will come.
Looks like we have another competitor possibly from Hong Kong on the carpet.
Yes.
Wong Jenny.
That movement, she spins it with, that is what we're calling, what you call flowering?
Yes.
Yes, it's beautiful.
So there's a flower that's forward, and there's also a flower that will come behind your back slightly. So we saw her execute both. Flower, or you hear people call it figure eight.
Yes. And somebody seeing it for the first time, I'd call it a propeller. But flower is perfect description. That's a great group. Lena from Russia.
So here we have Yelena from Russia showing movements that where she puts two hands on the broadsword. Typically, you will see that with an extended broadsword when you have two hands on the broadsword. So I'm not sure if she made that modification.
Is that Russian team waiting?
Sure. I couldn't tell if maybe she performed a two-handed broadsword with a single broadsword, but
well, she moves to second.
we saw one of her teammates perform a two-handed broadsword earlier. And now we have Lyubov from Kyrgyzstan.
slower, deliberate.
Yeah, this is a different style of broadsword than we've seen in some of the other styles.
It's clean and deliberate movements.
Call that a half-horse stance. Saryakova and Paula from Colombia.
You don't get much further than Sichuan province from Colombia. This could have been a 3-plane scenario.
Some years ago, Colombia hosted the World Games that introduced WUSHU to the World Games in Cali, Colombia. It was a great experience there.
I bet that inspired a lot of Colombian martial artists. Strong finish.
It's Alyssa from Italy.
Paula did well. Traveled a long way and did a good showing. Will be our final competitor, women's Group C broadsword, as you said, Alessia from Italy. Again, a very different approach.
Very deliberate, one technique, two technique form in this linear style, traditional.
Two balance maneuvers and a lowering of stance. These experienced judges will be capable of comparing and judging for their merit of a linear, deliberate performance like this against one of the flowerier performances.
Yes, that also, Robin, is one of the great aspects of the traditional World Kungfu Championships, where you have a variety of styles here. You are judged based on criteria that allow you to compete with forms that may look very different, but issues of balance, speed, fluency are still at the core of the judging, irrespective of the routine. Martial intent. We're now into our Group D broadsword. We have Kinsuke Sakai from Japan up.
Will be our last group of the day.
Well, at least of the morning session,
yes,
right?
There will be an afternoon session with 11 or 12 more groups. Eight competitors in this. Sakai starting it out.
our group D group being our more senior competitors.
Really interesting when we see some of these senior men and women, because some of them could have been training martial arts since they were a child, and others took it up as a senior.
Could have, exactly. And this is a unique aspect of the World Kungfu Championships where you would not see this grouping at the other World WUSHU Championships. So this is a great aspect of this competition.
Tsuke Sakai. And he's first of one.
We have Gerardo Rubio from Ecuador.
And we talked about, you know, a 60-year-old man who started at 4 versus a 60-year-old man who started at 55. And the incredible thing for somebody who does begin something in their 40s or their 50s is that reawakening that you can still learn new things, that you can change, that you can improve yourself and change your body and your mind. It's an incredible thing.
It's great for competitors to have this to look forward to. So here's an example where those kinds of incidents in competitions that penalize you if your flag comes off of your weapon, it's a different set of rules.
Nishikawa, Japan.
From Japan.
Yoshihiro Nishikawa.
So fantastic to see these senior practitioners. Here's an example of where Yoshihiro, when you look at the wrapping, this is an area where he will continue to develop in terms of wrapping the sword around his body.
And I think what we were just talking about, that idea for people later in their life, whatever age that is, whether it's 30 or 58, the idea that you can still keep improving is such a powerful thing as you age. I think instinctively or intuitively, some of us incorrectly believe that we get slower or we get weaker or